Hello, can everyone hear this microphone? We will be recording this and it'll be available on the library website in a few days. Does that work? Well, thank you all for coming this evening. And I'd also like to thank the library for giving us access to this space. It's been a long time since we, in our group, have been able to have a live event. And obviously we're learning as we go. So when this is over, if you have any feedback for us, please let us know. My name is Paul Roby. I'm a member of the Belfast area chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby, also known as CCL. The CCL is a nonpartisan grassroots organization that advocates for a national market-based policy to transition our economy away from carbon fuels. A key component of this policy we're advocating for would return money from carbon fees to every U.S. citizen, giving every household a check every month which could be used to help in that transition and to cover the expenses of the increasing carbon fees. This would have the most positive impact on families with lower incomes. Tonight, we have the opportunity to hear from one prospective legislator. Maryann Kinney is not able to join us tonight because of a physical problem with her property. But I think it's worth appreciating the fact that both Maryann Kinney and Chip Curry are sitting legislators. They're serving us. The legislature was in session this week. So the fact that Chip Curry has made time for us tonight, I am very appreciative of that. And this forum this evening, it was never intended to be a debate. This forum to discuss policy options for Maine concerning response to climate change is moderated by Dr. Peter Millard. Dr. Millard helped found this chapter, our chapter of the Citizens Climate Lobby. He's also chair of the Climate Committee of the Maine Physicians for Social Responsibility, and he's on the board of the Natural Resources Council of Maine. So I'm now going to turn this over to Peter Millard, please.
Thank you very much, Paul. Yeah, Maryann Kinney just emailed me a couple of minutes ago and said they've got a leaky water heater at their rental property and they have to rush over and take care of that. So she apologizes for not being able to make it, but we're fortunate that Chip Curry can be with us tonight. Remember that the election is November 8th, Tuesday, November 8th, and you can vote early as of October 8th, the month before. You can vote by mail if you want, and you can request an absentee ballot either here at City Hall or if you search for the Secretary of State's website, you can also find that and you can fill out a thing there and they'll mail you an absentee ballot. So that's quite easy to get. And you can either mail it back or you can drop it off at the City Hall, and there'll be a box outside the City Hall so to leave your ballot. So we're talking today about the competition for Senate District 11, which is Waldo County. Our current senator is Chip Curry, and he's here tonight to answer some questions about climate change and policies that we can make in Maine to address it. What we were going to give everybody 3 minutes and so forth, but given the fact that we only have one candidate, I think we'll just leave it to Chip to answer the questions, and We won't be holding up red cards telling them to stop, because I think we'll be okay that way. And we have 8 prepared questions. Both candidates receive the questions in advance, so they'd have a chance to prepare. And I think we'll probably have time afterwards to take questions from the audience as well. If you want to write your question down, you can do it on an index card. Bernie back there has the index cards, and you can do that. That's probably a preferable way of doing it. And so we'd ask you, if you have a question, write it down, and then I'll read them, and then Chip can address them. And if we have time, I think we could certainly also open it up for discussion at the end. So the first thing is just to, and I'll ask Chip to come up here and speak, because we have 2 microphones. We have one for here and one for recording. We're actually going to put this session on the public access TV station. There will be a link from the library, the Belfast Library, and also from the Facebook page from the Belfast Area Citizens Climate Lobby Group. So you should be able to, your family members should be able to see it as well. And that's why we have 2 different microphones, one for the camera and one for the building. And everybody's hearing me all right, are you? Yeah. Okay, that's good. So what I'll do is just ask Chip to stand up and tell us about himself.
Well, hello everybody. I think I know a lot of people in the room, and but my name is Chip Curry, and I have the honor of serving as the senator representing the 26 rural, coastal, and island communities of Waldo County. And I say that introduction often in committee room, and it is a great joy to represent all of Waldo County. I live in Belfast, and I have been in Waldo County for almost 30 years. Prior to living in Belfast, I was in Knox, and I also spent some time over in Unity and the Thorndike area. I spent that time in the 90s there. What brought me, my work has been, I started out working in outdoor recreation, and I worked at Unity College, where I taught outdoor leadership, civic engagement. We had a really strong service learning program there, and I was involved in that. And also environmental stewardship. The college has had a focus on, and continues to have a focus on, environmental stewardship. And that was my introduction to Waldo County, and it was a great introduction to Waldo County because there's a tremendous diversity of folks that are at Unity College. It has a strong conservation law enforcement program, so the hunter and fisher community was strongly represented at Unity College. There was also environmentalists that were pursuing all of the issues that we're facing in the 90s and today. And it was just an incredible introduction to the diversity of people here in Waldo County. I left that in the early 2000s, and I went over to work with under Governor King for the Governor's Children's Cabinet. And for about 10 years, I worked on children's issues, so helping communities organize to create healthier places for kids. The program was called Communities for Children. And I had the pleasure of working with recent college graduates who mostly, about 2/3 were recent college graduates. Others were retirees or just found themselves in a life situation where they could do a year of service through the AmeriCorps Vista program. And we placed Vista members all over the state on child and youth development projects. So some early child development projects, like doing home visiting programs, supporting home visiting programs, to things like supporting the YMCA when they were developing their after-school program over next to Troy Howard. Also, we had a number of Vistas that AmeriCorps Vista members, years of service, that served over with the Restorative Justice Project and the Belfast Game Loft. And so it was really passionate. It was incredible work, and I really found that I had a passion for helping communities to organize, to do the things that they wanted to do, and and became passionate about the state finding vehicles to help communities to do those things. I left that when our grant funding ran out. And I taught for a couple years in elementary, so I taught 3rd and 4th graders, and then I went back to working in higher education, and I serve as the director of the UMA Rockland Center, where I work predominantly with adult students who are going back to school to get a post-secondary credential that will help them get the work that will sustain themselves and their families. And so I am passionate. So if you follow my career, I started out with kids, like how do kids thrive? And then if you work on those issues, you quickly move over to like, well, okay, parents, having strong families and strong supporting parents to be successful. And if you do that, you quickly get to jobs that matter and jobs that support families. And so that's been a lot of my path is working so currently in serving in the Senate, I chair the committee that focuses on economic development and workforce development. So how do we bring jobs that support our communities, and how do we prepare people for those jobs? And I love it. I love it. I've spent most of my time on the workforce side of that question, and so I love learning about like what's working, what's not working, how do we bring jobs here that are consistent with our rural communities and help our rural communities to thrive. And so families that can thrive, seniors that can retire in the area and thrive, all of that is very exciting to me, but also communities that can get what they need. That they can support their schools to the level that they need to and want to, that they can continue to keep their firehouses, that they can have emergency medical services in their area. I'm happily chairing the Blue Ribbon Commission on Maine EMS right now because I'm terrified about the challenges our emergency medical services are having all over our rural parts of the state and urban parts of the state. So that's my introduction. Let's see if I missed anything I was trying to say. I chair the committee on, it's called the IDEA Committee. It's Innovation Development, Economic Advancement, and Business. That's the one that does the economic development and workforce. I serve on inland fisheries and wildlife. Our hunting community and our natural lands are a huge part of Waldo County. And then I'm also passionate about some other issues that kind of came up that weren't originally on my radar because they're happening now. They're very much on my radar. And one of that is protecting kids through prevention and making sure that DHS is doing everything they can, has everything that they need in order to protect kids from abuse and neglect. And then also really working very hard to deal with the crisis that our small farmers and all of our farmers are facing in Waldo County with the PFAS crisis. So we have had just people's life work just put into doubt and question because their farmlands have been contaminated by the forever chemicals of PFAS and PFOA and the whole 5,000 different chemicals that were. And I was very happy to support and speak to legislation to bring to fund that to $80 million level, which is really just the start, honestly, to support our farmers. So I'll leave it there. I think that probably went longer than 3 minutes. Thank you.
All right, now we'll start in the questions. So the first question for Chip is, as we come out of the COVID economic crisis, how do you see the green economy assisting in the recovery while protecting the interests of the most economically vulnerable in our community?
You'll notice I don't speak, I don't have scripts written for any of this. I got the questions a long time ago, and I forgot to thank you all. Thank you for doing this. The Citizens Climate Lobby sponsored the a debate last round. I think the only one we had was for the primaries. And of all of the organizations that have worked to influence and educate the public and also influence legislators, Citizens Climate Lobby has done the best because they give us these questions a month in advance. And it's a homework assignment. And so you got a homework assignment to like, oh, I don't know about that thing. Well, research it, you got time. And so thank you so much, and it's been incredibly effective. So to your question, we are in a much better place than many states in the country. For us, green jobs and green this is a jobs winner. So the climate recovery, the doing renewable energy in the state of Maine is a jobs winner. And we are able to, it's an economic development driver for us. We are not, we're not saying, putting coal miners out of work in order to do this. We are excitedly training folks to work in all sorts of sectors of renewable energy and conservation. And so I just want to think about the innovation that happened here. It was a brainchild here in Belfast, but it's happening in the Madison Mill, and that's the Go Labs project. Yeah, that's they've had different related names, and no, it's they've got a name for their product, but it's taking wood pulp and mixing it to make insulation, and so it's working with our forest products industry, and to renew an old mill that was sitting derelict, hiring back some of the engineers who actually worked in the mill to rehab that mill, and it is and putting out product both blown in and fiberboard out of wood, and so incredible benefit to do renewable and to conserve, particularly for new homes, but also can be used for weatherization. So I'm very excited by that. You mentioned vulnerable populations, and I think that's going to be the big deal. As we look at everyone stepping up into better and better fuel efficient either housing in terms of the design of the home or how well it's weatherized, or the heating system, whether moving off oil and moving on to heat pumps or other technology, and then also transportation. All of those things are capital intensive at the front end. And so people who have the capital and have the financing can do it. And those who don't are subject to all of the price shocks that will continue to come around fossil fuels. And so the big work we need to do, and we are doing, and we have to continue doing and make sure it works, is making these things available through creative financing, through a whole host of strategies to make sure that these benefits are working across class. Otherwise, we will just continue to have a class divide that's happening, or that you could feel. I can feel. I go all over the county and knock on doors. You could feel it's like, okay, oh, you came over here in a Prius, and there's a little bit of like, you know, sometimes there's a little bit of animosity that feels like a class divide, you know, if I'm with a driver who has a Prius. And so sometimes we talk about that. And so it really these benefits that we are seeing, and their financial benefits, really need not just climate benefits, they really need to be felt across the economic spectrum.
The second question for Chip is, the Climate Council that Governor Mills created has completed their framework called Maine Won't Wait. Which recommendations in the Climate Council's report should be passed by the legislature in the next session?
So the first thing I want to say about the Maine Won't Wait Climate Council report is I have great gratitude that we have it, that we have this report. Those aren't my notes. All right, that'll be interesting. So the fact that the governor had a diverse group of leaders working on this gave it a great deal of credibility. And we have a vision, and we have a plan. I know some people were disappointed that the goals of 45% by 2030, 45% reduction in carbon by 2030, and 80% reduction by 2050. I know some people were disappointed that that wasn't 100% reduction by 2050. But we have some goals, and we have strategies that we can compare to those goals. And for me, that's the biggest thing, that we could say, all right, now, will those things that we're proposing get us there? And how are they getting there? Are they not getting us there? How do we adjust them? So there's a tremendous number of proposals and recommendations, some of which are already in play. So I'll highlight some of them that I'm excited by. The transition to highly efficient heating and cooling systems. So that's obviously, and all of the efforts around, and we'll get to the Green Bank question later, that's on it, but the work of the Green Bank. Lots of ways in which we're transitioning our heating system. We're feeling that financially right now. All of us are feeling that financially right now. And so transitioning to that it will be a very big deal. Home weatherization, just as much. If we can't just be around the energy source. We've got to be trapping that and making it far more weatherization. And the weatherization, honestly, has the biggest impact on the most vulnerable and the most most at risk in their housing and the quality of their housing. I've done various weatherization projects that were, when I worked with AmeriCorps, we did an annual weatherization kind of volunteer effort. And so I've been in a lot of homes that struggled on that. And, you know, for want of a window that they just can't fully shut, you know, is huge. I think of the window dressers, which is an incredible organizing effort around here for low-tech ways to weatherize. Really amazing. Broadband. Broadband is a climate change policy because you reduce road miles for commuting. So the extent to which people can more often, I'm just thinking if people were more often able to, even one day a week, you just reduced, you know, if you had a typical Monday through Friday job, you just reduced 20%. Yeah, 20% of it. And if people can fully work from home, then you're massively reducing road miles. Grid upgrades is the biggest thing. Currently, the biggest problem with renewable energy projects, from my perspective, is about a third of the cost of the large projects are for grid updates. Getting the grid in shape for that renewable energy. It was built to be a centralized system. Now we have a diversified system with energy going both ways. They've got to do work for that. And the CMP has not been doing that. They've been waiting for the solar project or the wind project in order to put the cost onto them. And so grid upgrades is a huge deal. I'm a huge fan of promoting clean tech and innovation, just as I mentioned with the Go Labs project. And then because we have really creative people, and if we can leverage that and get people in all sorts of places thinking about these issues and working on these and making them successful, then we go a lot further. And lastly, climate change response cannot be partisan anymore because these are decades-long efforts. And we can't have one change in power and everything's derailed. So the big effort around communication and talking and working at the community level, at the sector level, about the work we need to do and sustain for decades has to be all of us. It can't just be one party because it will never work. And so I'm really positive about that. There's a ton of recommendations in it. I'm not going to try to go after all of those. Those were the by short highlight of things that I was excited by.
Dr. Richard Silkman, in his report called A New Energy Policy Direction for Maine, lays out a plan for the Maine economy to be 100% transitioned away from fossil fuels by 2050 with no increase to electricity ratepayers. How do you see this becoming a reality?
Peter, that's a great question. I will say, honestly, I can't yet see how it becomes a reality. I can't yet see it. I think I heard the story on the radio. I am a hopeful pessimist, evidently. I never would have described myself that way. But when you look at all evidence, and I talked just a moment ago about how it's still, these issues are still very partisan and still very kind of cultural fights and political fights. There's a lot of evidence that says we won't get there, or that a lot of evidence that says, or it's doubtful, or it's a challenge. That's my pessimism, just looking out at the evidence and seeing, we may not get to these things based on what I'm seeing around us. And we need every other state to do it, and we need other countries to do it too. So there's a source of pessimism. Now, so what do you do with that? I'm not going to be the dance band on the Titanic and say, well, let's have fun now, because I don't know how we're getting there. So I do believe there is a pathway. So that's where the hopeful is, that there are pathways. There's not one pathway. Dr. Silkman has an incredibly provocative, really first kind of proposal about how to go about doing this. The consumer-owned utility is central to it. is central to that. What made me pessimistic also is I didn't see anyone else, namely the investor-owned utilities, really engaging in that seriously for dialogue. And so I think the central argument of Dr. Silkman is that if you make these a consumer-owned utility, there are millions and millions of dollars worth of grid improvements that have to happen, just an exorbitant amount. And if that has to happen when you guarantee 10% profits, then it's all 10% more. Versus if a consumer-owned utility does it, they could get all of that capital at 2.5% interest. So that difference is the massive increase. Ultimately, our goal, I absolutely believe, we've got to get there. Climate change is real, and we've got to get to these goals. I'm passionate about that. We can't get there where it is unsustainable for people to live now. The pain cannot be that hard because we won't be able to maintain the political motivation, the political, the consensus to stay there. A new party will come in, or a new will say, well, we just can't get there, and they'll back off of it. So we have to maintain the political momentum, and doing that means we keep everyone on board. And the pain today cannot be that onerous that people can't figure it out. So we've got to work on all of those issues. So the real people, the old message is people got to eat during the revolution. This is a massive undertaking that Maine and the world needs to do, but people have got to be taken care of while we're going through it. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Part of the Climate and Clean Energy Plan is the expansion of efficient mass transit. Would you support one issue to repair and reconstruct state-owned railways?
It depends on that. I really have to see the details of what's being proposed, and I want to make sure that the real human behavioral research is there that says these will return on investment. They're not, mass transit is great until no one rides it, and then you got a problem, and you're not being more fuel efficient. So we can't have a fantasy person that is behaving exactly how we want. We've got to understand the social science of what people need and how they engage in the world, and in order to create systems that are effective. So I want to see it. So it depends. If I think it would really deliver for us at a cost-effective way, I would support it.
For which policies would you advocate to expand solar power and wind power for Maine?
Great question. So first off, I want to lead with one of the things that is real and people feel it when they drive down the highways and byways. So we need to protect farmlands, and we need to protect, especially given where we are with PFAS. That farmlands are prime. Prime farmland is really important, and so we need to make sure that we're continuing to protect them. We can do both. We can protect farmlands. We can expand solar and wind. I think there's some very innovative strategies that people are using. One of the critiques of so we have all of these parking lots. Why are we not putting solar on top of them, making roofs on these parking lots, or some type not full roofs, but putting them above? And people say, well, the steel would be too much part of that. Well, guess what? We're really good at composite wood here in the state of Maine. We know how to do composite wood, and we can still do. And so I would love to see the technology and the innovation on putting solar all over parking lots, putting them in in those areas, and being very planful about those things. Related, I mentioned my background in, or my involvement with inland fisheries and wildlife. We also have to be really careful about these, and again, it's about good planning about where we place these, because we fence those, and if we divert all the wildlife in some other patterns, we have to know what we're doing ahead of time. We can't just have them go everywhere and not know that all the deer are suddenly going to be out on the road. We have to know how this is going to impact the wildlife in addition to farmland. So other things I'm very excited by is Ultimately, we need to invest in wind and solar, particularly in Aroostook County. They really want it. They want it to support their farms. They want it to support what they're doing up there. We don't have enough infrastructure between Aroostook County and the rest of Maine. Their grid goes to Canada. We have, we will need to have transmission lines. I am happy to see initially the transmission lines will, the process. They're working very transparently with towns. They don't have a predetermined route. It isn't like, we'll tell you later. They're working with towns to figure out what's the pathway down to bringing it down from Aroostook County into the grid system in the rest of Maine. And so that's something, and that's kind of a response to the very much rejection of siting wind in Western Maine. We have a lot of wind over there, but people don't want to see it in the mountains, and they don't want to see it in those areas. They're happy. Aroostook has been very, very open and welcoming of wind power in the farms up there. I think the other thing that we have to do is look very hard at Mac Point for the development of a wind hub. Offshore wind, now there's no guarantee that Maine gets to determine what offshore wind is going to look like in the state of Maine. It's outside of Maine. So just because it's called the offshore, Gulf of Maine, we don't have any necessarily ability to have a stake in that. It could be another state. It could be companies outside of here that are going to develop offshore wind in the state. I think we need to be doing it. And going back to my very first question around the green economy, I would love to see us playing a significant role in the development of offshore wind and the jobs and the economic development at Mac Point. I think that would be outstanding. With that, we also really care about our fisheries, and we really care about our lobstering. So we also need to be doing it rather than some other state, because we can also negotiate and have our lobstermen and have our fisher people involved in that process, so that we're paying attention and not encroaching. They're very concerned on it, and I understand that, and I respect that. They're feeling a lot of pressure from all directions right now, and we need to have them involved in the planning and process to limit any impacts to them. Lastly, one of the things that we passed was an energy accountability bill for grid, and that's, in my head, I can't remember what it was officially called. I always called it the CMP accountability bill. And so it probably didn't name them as a company in the bill, but I can't remember what it was actually titled. And that, one of the things it did a whole lot in terms of customer satisfaction, and if they're really low, they get fined, and you could be forced to sell and things like that. But one of the things that were really important in it is grid planning. So it opens up the process of grid planning. They've got to tell us what they're involved in planning, and they've got to take that, their citizens in the state, not just the company, can be involved in that, are involved in that. And so that grid planning process, opening it up, means that we're making sure that we're developing this grid for a way that can handle our renewable energy resources. And I think those are the kind of the most important things right now. Thanks.
The statewide green bank is now a reality. What are the next steps to make it effective?
So I really want to compliment Representative Paige Ziegler and give a great respect to him on his work on the Clean Bank, and his championing it. Paige Ziegler is he serves on the EU Energy Utilities and Technology Committee, which this came out of, and he was a great force on this. So the Clean Energy and Sustainability Accelerator is what is the Green Bank. So there's no bank. It's not a bank. I mean, in the way that everyone thinks about a bank. You don't go there and you get checks or anything like that. It is designed to be an accelerator and a financer of a number of renewable energy efforts and weatherization efforts. And so a lot of the things that we need it to do, I've talked about already, especially around that equity, around our most vulnerable. It is just getting started. We created the structure, and because we created the structure, we were expecting it to be funded in the Build Back Better bill from the feds. That didn't happen, but it was funded through the Inflation Reduction Act bill. And so we have, to my knowledge, we have the money in the state, I believe. If not, it's on the way. And so it's this federal money, and the Efficiency Maine Trust manages it, and they give out very low interest loans for individuals doing weatherization. They give out very low interest loans for renewable energy projects. They give it out to contractors. There's been a big problem with contractors doing large and small projects getting bank funding. So we're back to that financing question of how do you, if you can't get the financing, what do you do? And so we're trying to solve that with this, with the Green Energy and Sustainability Accelerator, the Green Bank. Yeah. And so the next thing is, honestly, vote in Paige Ziegler, because he wants to serve on the EUT committee. Again, wants to go back to that. And that's the committee that has oversight over Efficiency Maine. And they're going to be providing oversight and making sure that they're moving fast and efficient. You know, Maine did really well with all of the COVID relief funding from the feds. We got that money out faster than many states. And I think because we did this last session, we created the Green Bank, we already have the infrastructure ready to do the same thing with this funding. And so essentially, we need to get at it and do the work.
You already talked briefly about a consumer-owned utility. Could you explain more about your support for a consumer-owned utility?
You've looked at my voting record. So I supported the consumer-owned utility when it came up for legislation. It did not pass. I mean, it passed the legislature, but it did not pass ultimately pass and become law. It was a tough decision. It's not, from my perspective, it's not it's not an easy decision. It has a lot of risks. Staying where we are has a lot of risks. And so I did a lot of research on this and talked with a lot of folks that I respect. I found that the folks with the consumer-owned utility that were championing that were very effective on getting into the details on this is how it could work, this is how it could work, this is how it could work. And I was like, hey, thank you very much for all that information. I want to hear from the utilities. What's your plan for getting us to where we need to be by 2050? What's your plan? And I get really frustrated because it was about, I think, 3 weeks before the vote. I hadn't heard anything, crickets. And then I got a flyer on my desk that said, consumer-owned utilities, this is socialism. And that was the argument. That was it. And I was like, oh, that's going to be the debate. I was expecting a really detailed debate. First off, let me say consumer-owned utilities are like libraries. They exist all over the country. They're in very conservative states that have them. So they're all over the place. They have very good records in there. How one goes, we're in new territory with moving from an investor-owned utility to a consumer-owned utility. So the pathway to getting there, that's new. That's something that's one of those risks. How can you go about doing that? Are you going to spend decades in the courts? How do you do this in a way that we need to do it now and soon? So that's where all of this ended. That's where all of it were. Now I think we're at a referendum level. The supporters of the consumer-owned utility are working a referendum. I will tell you, my hope is that we actually have some really good debates, Oxford-style debates of this issue. I'd love for you all to sponsor those, where you have passionate people on both sides who can talk about how do we get to our climate goals within a consumer-owned utility or within an investor-owned utility, because I'm eager to hear that debate. Because I gotta believe, this is my hopeful pessimism, I gotta believe that we can get there with either model. We have mostly investor-owned utilities. So if it's impossible for investor-owned utilities to get there, we're in trouble. We're in a lot of trouble because they have to get there in all sorts of states all over the country. But I haven't seen a willingness of our investor-owned utility companies to engage in that debate in the details. And I think the people of Maine deserve that. And I'm eagerly waiting to hear it.
Thank you, Chip. And the last question is about the power transmission corridor bringing hydroelectric power through Maine from Quebec to Massachusetts. This continues to be controversial. What is your opinion about the corridor?
I'm still opposed to the corridor. I think what was strongly influenced me was also seeing the number of towns along the corridor who started out for it but then switched. And that means a lot to me. We have a long history of home rule and being able to control your own destiny. I don't like it when people out of state or out of parts of our area try to tell us what to do. I'm seeing a lot of folks along the pathway saying, no, we don't want it. And I respect that. I also think Maine can play a much bigger and better role than being an extension cord between Quebec and Massachusetts. So I would, yeah, I'm still opposed to it.
Well, that's the end of the formal questions, but I'll use my prerogative as the moderator to ask my own question. And that is, what do you see the prospects for working this legislative session between Democrats and Republicans to solve some of these very difficult energy problems?
I'm always optimistic on that front. I mean, or hopeful. I guess I'll use my language from earlier. I'm always hopeful. I think this summer was pretty telling across the world in terms of like, oh, we're not talking 30 years out for climate impacts anymore. We're talking pretty right now, and you know, we're not asking any longer. You know, it used to be, it's like, oh, is that impact of climate change? Is is this storm or is that flood? It's like, well, there's so many that, yeah, they're just all related. You know, they're all just connected. And so I am hopeful that we can, and I think I'm hopeful that we can, and we do so smartly so that we're not just falling into historic traps of class and big government, that we do lots of creative ways to help everyone that needs to get there, get there. Yeah.
All right, I wonder, do we have some questions on cards from the audience?
Are there any other?
What discussions or work are taking place in the legislature to foster the development of microgrids?
That's a great question, and I really don't know. No, I'll just be honest with that. You know, in the work that I've been, you know, most legislators will take an area of focus. My focus has been on economic development and families thriving, and so I really rely on some other legislature and seeing the bills that come forward. So I know that there is significant talk around microgrids and work around it. Those will all be happening in EUT, and that would be a great question for my colleague Paige Ziegler. So.
Now, I actually have a couple of questions for the audience. One of the members of the journalistic communities here tonight, and we want to find out, why did you come tonight, and did you know who you would vote for before you came, or do people actually come here because they weren't really sure who they were going to vote to and they wanted to learn more? If anybody would like to just address either one of those questions, we'd really appreciate it. The first question is, why did you come? And the second question is, had you already made up your mind and you just sort of wanted some reinforcement for that?
I knew who I wanted to vote for.
Hope so.
Go ahead, sir.
So I came because I just wanted to hear what Chip knew about climate change, climate policy.
Yeah.
And I suppose the other candidate too, but I knew who I was gonna vote for.
I certainly was hopeful that we would hear two candidates who both saw their role as solving problems. And that both Maryann Kinney and Chip Curry are currently in the legislature trying to solve problems concerned about the future of Maine. And as Chip said, we try to be hopeful. And the question about working across the aisle, I would really hope that if Maryann Kinney were here, that her answers would be in the spirit of addressing these problems in a constructive way. And I'm disappointed that we weren't able to get reassurance that that is what both candidates see as their role. But that did not come to pass, I'm afraid.
And I do have one more question for Chip.
Great.
And it's about carbon offsets. And so we really know what you think about the large role of forests and farms in carbon offsets in Maine.
So I think the opportunity to sequester carbon is, it's research and it's a possibility for Maine to be a leader. I know there's hope that we could do more than, net zero for Maine, but we can help to serve offset New England. And so, I know enough that there are forest practices that can be engaged where we can continue to have our forest industry, but also be sequestering a lot more carbon. I've heard some also regarding our oceans and kelp and our tidal areas that can also be doing a lot of carbon sequestration. And so, this is when it's like innovation and research and then policy. And so I think we're at somewhat of the start of that, but that's on the table as well with everything.
I think we're fine if folks from the audience would like to ask questions directly at Chip. You might want to just pull your mask down when you're asking the questions, just so everybody else can hear, though. Go ahead,
Yeah,
sir.
so I was the one that asked the carbon offset question, of course. and I just want to point out to people that might not know that the forest carbon storage in Maine already offsets a very high percentage of our carbon outputs. And so what we're looking at is both maintaining that and increasing it. And certainly the seaweed industry has great potential, changing the agricultural systems to store more soil carbon has great potential, and our forests have great potential. And yes, it means that Maine has the potential to be offsetting what's going on in a lot of the rest of the country as well, because we also have more potential than almost any other state for wind energy, solar, and tidal energy combined. I mean, we have so much opportunity here to be making money off the rest of the country, basically. Improving our economy by being able to offset carbon for the entire Northeast, many areas of the Northeast.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Bernie.
Chip, even before the IRA was passed, President Biden had set aside $2.3 billion to go for improvements in heating and cooling for low-income families. And I'm wondering, what is Maine doing to chase that money?
My understanding is that's exactly what the Energy and Sustainability Accelerator is to do, is using. They're using those funds. And because we've already set it up, we're ahead of other states that we're using those funds for very low interest loans. Think about it. So if you can guarantee that if you don't have to put the capital down to get the heat pump, to get the weatherization, to do that work, then you can reduce your over the lifetime it's cheaper, but also today it's cheaper. You're not having to absorb that capital expense that you don't have. And so that's the big thing. That's what we need to watch over the next year, is how fast and how well that rolls out in terms of loans. And that's happening at Efficiency Maine Trust. So there are staff there that are rolling that out in terms for loans for individuals and loans for contractors. Yeah, great question. And this is always a slightly risky situation because many times, as a legislator, you are a generalist in a lot of things. You go from one thing to another thing in 30 seconds. The next bill is up and it's completely different. It's like now we're talking about something completely different. And so I will tell you, I rely on experts and I rely on folks that I bring people in that have credibility, that I can hear and know what they're talking about. And so on these issues, I feel like I have a decent level of competence, but I always bring in other people. And so if I say something in terms of sequestration, you're like, oh, I've done my research on that. I've done my PhD work on that. Yes, great, please, let's talk.
Do we have any further questions? All right, well, thank you very much, and please don't forget to vote. And if you're interested in learning more about Citizens Climate Lobby, if you just search for Citizens Climate Lobby Belfast, you'll find a website which is a link to the national website for Belfast, and you could just fill out a little form, and we'll get an email with your contact information and contact you. We meet just about every week remotely via Zoom, a small group of 6 or 8 of us from the Belfast area. So if you're interested in joining us, we'd love to have more folks participate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.